That's what you do, like a big one.
Melanie showed me the second one.
That's a girl. That's a yeah, well, we just run the math because we can separate out.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Okay, so we're going. Okay.
Really? Melanie, can I switch with so they can see you here, not the shiny, but yeah, bowling ball of the head. All right. Yeah. So you're saying back when
looking at my pencil.
There you go. Or did you? No.
So for you guys who were not here last time or were not, I think at Prince Frederick, I'm not sure if everybody knows who I am. I'm Matsela, I'm the Teacher Education Program Coordinator. And I've just been working with Melanie on trying to help you guys operationalize what it is you do in the faculty evaluation, the faculty observations, the peer observations, so that we all have sort of a sense of when you go into a classroom, it doesn't matter if it's a lab or if it's a simulation or if it's a lecture, that there is sort of a basic standard for what it is that you're looking at, how you're evaluating what's going on in that classroom. And the way to do that, because I know this came up a couple of times as well, having the rubric and having it operationalized in an observable way is so key. Because then you don't have to worry about, yeah, but the nursing faculty member I saw last semester did this, or, but I know in history they do that, or, well, I wouldn't have done that in my classroom. That kind of stuff that should not matter, because it's more about what does the rubric say that CSM counts as being teaching that meets our expectations in terms of these peer observations. And on the form that you guys have, and this one I had to make a copy. You guys probably know this one better than me. I just took out of the spaces, the writing spaces out of the form that you adopted last May. And it says, if the overall impression is that the faculty member being observed will be rated at 75% or better in the classroom, the faculty member has met expectations. So that's what we're trying to get at today. What does that 75% benchmark look like? What are we expecting to see? So one of the things that came out of the last meeting was that a lot of people had asked that, can we have something to look at? Can we have a worksheet or something to take with us when we do observations, rather than trying to, remember and synthesize all that information and then go back to our offices and fill out the form, which is somewhat vague. And I don't use vague in a derogatory way. It's good to be vague because then you can use that, you could use the evidence to support your evaluations, to support your assessments, but it doesn't really help you when it just says the students participated in activities. And then you're thinking, well, what does that look like though? Did they participate? Did they not participate? So I just, and one of the emails that Melanie sent out or that she posted in my learning, I just pulled up what I thought were 4 relatively representative sets of observation tools, worksheets that you could print and take with you. Certainly we would want to share these if we were going to use one of these worksheets as a note-taking method or a note-taking instrument. We obviously want our faculty to know, we don't want to, it's not going to be top secret. They should know what kinds of things we're going to be looking for, what kinds of evidence is going to be appropriate. But something that will help you be organized and effective when you go into a classroom to do an observation. So the 2 things I was hoping to accomplish today is, number 1, even though we don't obviously have all the committee members here, to decide on at least which template you think will be most useful, and then to start to lay out the evidence that we would expect to see of a faculty member meeting the 75% benchmark. I will leave it, I'm not on the committee, I'm obviously not the chair of the committee, I'll leave it up to you guys if you want there to be sort of levels in it. I've included a couple of different kinds of rubrics. If we want to just leave it, meets expectations, does not meet expectations, or if you want to have like exceeds expectations, meets expectations, does not meet expectations. Those are some of the things that I think as a committee you guys can determine. So each of I handed hopefully out the packets in 2s. so that you could see the original form and the university that it came from, as well as sort of a blank version that we could use. If anybody is happening to try to follow along with the stuff that was posted in my learning, the number 1 form is the Northeastern rubric. It's from the Northeastern Center for Advancing Teaching and Learning. So I gave you a filled out copy of how they use this form, and then you should also have a blank copy of what a CSM form might look like. Obviously, we'll need some fine tuning. So the Northeastern one, any thoughts on this, first of all, before I tell you what I'm thinking?
Which one is it? Sorry.
It says Northeastern, it has a little.
Oh.
This is actually one of the ones we use when we made ours. This was one of the
Oh,
ones
really?
we, look at. What I do like about this compared to the other ones maybe is I know some of the people were uncomfortable with the like whole kind of Likert scale type thing and wanted it to be more qualitative, I guess. So I like it that it just has strengths and it doesn't give you like a Likert type scale where we're judging. So I think that will go over well with our committee, just from what people have said, that they're comfortable with being able to assess.
Rather than put a point value on something.
Right.
Any other thoughts on that?
That's kind of why the same reason I like it. I like that we would focus not on just what maybe they could do differently, but what did they do well and what are their strengths. Because when you're being evaluated, it's nice to hear what you're doing well, because then you're more open to listening to what needs improvement.
I think if we're going to go with something like this, and looking at the blank one in comparison to the Northeastern one, we would need to add in more definitions or explanations underneath each.
For all of the CSM ones, they're just very basic.
Yeah.
All I did was fill it in with the 7 items that you're supposed to be looking at on the
Okay.
form that you actually have to complete. So I didn't try to
Because
predict or
there's a lot.
push any perspective.
We would need to take the definitions, I think, much further as to what are we looking at. Some of the things we don't really see when we're going to evaluate them. You may be able to intuitively pick up on it, but you can't. You don't move the camera. You don't intuitively pick up on it. Whereas on the Northeast one, they do have a lot of definitions, and I think that would be also helpful.
Yeah, and that's really a great point, because even when I look at the one that we use at CSM, the objectives for the class session were achieved. Again, we need to come up with 3 or, well, maybe not 3 or 4, however many you guys think are appropriate, observable things that you can say, this is how I know the objectives for this session were achieved, or this is how I know that they did not appear to be achieved. What are the main things? The instructor clarified the objectives for the students. As I'm looking through this and going over this, like, I don't really think I know what that means. So we need to figure out what we think it means so that we all are coming in with the same understanding.
And sometimes I was in 3 different rooms this past semester, and looking at something, sometimes we don't have a clear objective just for that day. Sometimes it's objectives to reach to the end outcome. And so it might not be as clearly identified, whereas other classes it is much more clearly identified. And it's not that I don't think the instructors did well. I think the instructors did fantastic. But me saying were the objectives clearly identified, well, no, but they did a really, really good job. I could follow exactly where they were going. And I think we have to kind of look at that as well, because not every class has.
Sorry. All wrap up in a tiny bow.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
a continuum.
It's a continuum, and you can't. Josh had I was in Josh's room, and he had it clearly defined on the board, clearly stated to the students what they were going to do that day, clearly had a method as to how he was getting there, what they were going to do. The students were all prepared for it. He always was doing it. It was like a boom, 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 and by the end of the day, here's your example problems. No, you did these problems. You got it. Okay, now you can go. It was very clearly, logically ordered. But a nursing class I went into, you could never have done that, because what she was talking about was on a continuum that we take 4 days to talk about. And all I saw was one little snippet of it. So was it a good class? Yeah, it was fantastic.
What did she do? I'm interested to know what.
I was watching a psych class, and it was really, really good. She was talking about depression and suicide and schizophrenia. I mean, heavy topics. And she was getting the students interacting and explaining to lay the foundation so that the next session she could then go in to more in depth as to how to be treated, but she has to lay the foundation first. But
And I think that that's an objective though, because it doesn't have to be that you're done with it, you never revisit it.
right.
But I think, like you said, if your objective for that day was to lay the foundational definitions of depression, schizophrenia.
But it wasn't written out that way, you know, it was written out more as an outcome, as a goal. So, yes, but then I went into another one, criminal justice. She had one objective, and she had one 5x4, 3x4 note card. What is, gosh, I've forgotten what it was, but anyway, it was beautifully done. And it was like in that 15 minutes, I mean, she really got those people going. You know, so I think that just saying what is the objective met, you have no idea. You know, it needs a lot more depth, a lot more meat to it.
Well, and too, so that's something that we need to discuss, the difference between an objective and an outcome. Because certainly, hopefully, all of our objectives, the things that we're doing each day, they're not stuff that we never revisit. Even if it's math, you know, it's not that they never have to perform that skill or use that algorithm, or I'm trying to think of math words that I don't really know any math words. So yeah, I think we're hopefully in all of our classes constantly building on, you know, you might finish up one segment of history, but when you go on to the next, you're saying, yeah, but remember what was happening back then and look at how it's affecting what's going on at this time or in this country. Were you gonna say something, Josh?
Yeah. I think perhaps a combination of the number system and this chart would be good, because if you only do the number system, the one number defines how they did in that category, and yet there might be both good things and things that they can improve on. So this chart, you can clearly define what they did well, and at the same time, there might also be things that they can improve on within one category. Whereas if you only use this chart though, and you list both good things and bad things, I think the number helps show if you were more towards, you did that really well and there was only one or two small things they can improve on, or if it was mainly bad things, like things that need improvement, and you know, the one or two things that they did well. So then, in my mind, the number helps. Yeah, the number helps show which end they were more closer to, whereas the chart allows you to point out things that are both good and need improvement. So, you know, perhaps a combination of the two systems.
So you mean qualitative as well as quantitative?
Sure.
Well, it's like this chart. I don't know, no, the thought just went out of my head. But I feel like the chart kind of explains the score, and the score supports the chart. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I had it in my head a minute ago, but one kind of I guess I'm saying the chart kind of quantifies, or the number one, but and this kind of verifies.
Right, and the number one would, in my mind, would tell you which side of this chart was more prevalent, I guess.
Yeah.
So, but what I'm hearing is people, like, let me just move on to what is, if you're in Zoom land, it would be number 2, draft 4 of number 2, the Iowa State University Scale Rubric Teaching Observation. I'm hearing from you guys that you don't like this kind of thing, where it lays out exactly what you're supposed to see and there's a point value attached to it. This one may be too rigid or too narrow for what you're thinking, because it doesn't allow you to, although there is a comment section on this one, where you could say, well, if I gave a person a number 1 on preparation and organization, instructor lacks preparation and organization of the material, content, and class session, then your comments could be your qualitative, you know, there weren't enough handouts for everybody, you know, she kept saying the wrong term for that psychological, you know, disorder. where she couldn't pronounce the names of the whatever, then you could write that in the I mean, that'd be a little harsh. You probably would want to phrase it a little bit more tactfully, but you could say that there were concerns about the pronunciation and the knowledge of the content in terms of the disorders that were being discussed.
I personally am fine with the Iowa State one, but maybe instead of the one column, replace it with these two columns, strengths and.
Yeah.
Well, and I think for us too, according to the rubric that we have approved as a college, you just need to either meet or not meet. So we don't necessarily have to say, oh, 4 points on this, 3 points on that. It's basically yes or no, strengths or considerations. And maybe if we, as you were saying earlier, if we can fine tune the learning focus part to a place where we all agree that, yeah, that's appropriate for, you guys have seen way more CSM teachers than I have seen. Then it will be easier to say, well, if most of the stuff you wrote was in strengths, then they met the expectations. But if your strengths were kind of limited and most of the things that you noticed were in questions or considerations, then that might be, does not meet expectations. Without having to put like a hard and fast, maybe could it be a 3.5, you know, that, I think sometimes when we put number values on things we get, then it becomes hard to differentiate between the two levels of the scale. Excuse me. The one thing though I wonder about, okay, is in terms of when you guys go out to observe, do you take notes? Do you do things? Is that something that you want to have a more official way of doing, or would you rather do your notes your own way and then worry about the evaluation part or the form part afterwards?
I wouldn't like to have the form in front of me then, because then I'm looking at what box do I put this in?
Yeah.
Versus I just jot little bullets down and then I go back and, you know, see where it fits.
Okay, and that's what I was thinking too, as a lot of these were, especially form number 3 that came from the University of Minnesota, there's a comment box for each section. But if you're looking at objectives for the class session were achieved, but then all of a sudden they're using materials and you're trying to flip over and write your materials comments in the materials box, that didn't seem like it was going to be particularly useful for someone who's actually doing this. It's the peer review of lecture-based teaching form. It has a comments area, but this is, I think, something you would do afterwards when you've been able to synthesize and think about all those bullet points. Okay. We can get rid of this one.
What's that?
Can I just make a comment about the number 2 one, the Iowa one?
Yes.
Yeah. Number 2 in the Iowa one, for all of us who have sat on interview committees, do you ever have a problem when you're sitting on an interview committee and filling out the form that looks like this?
Mm-hmm.
I think we would have the exact same problems if we were trying to fill out this kind of form for evaluating our peers. I know I've only used a form like this when I'm sitting on interview committees for incoming positions. And I struggle with this form all the time during interview committees. And I don't know if that'd be different in doing it as an evaluation of a peer, but I find this form very hard to do. And maybe using Josh and whoever made the idea of taking out number 1 and putting strengths and weaknesses might make it better for me.
And when we do interviews, we all grade it individually,
Right.
and then they add it all up to see, you know,
Right.
the grade. But we're just one person
Exactly.
now in the classroom. Plus, this form goes to the chairs to evaluate the faculty member. So, I mean, do they get input on what they really like to see? I mean, we're writing up what our observation, they weren't there, but yet they're doing.
Well, they get to see it before we send it in,
Right.
right?
But I mean, if we send it to the chair, I mean, are they going to go through all these numbers or read what we say here, or what's important to them to see?
And as far as I understand, and Mel, you can correct this if I'm wrong, what we're trying to do today is just come up with some sort of worksheet for you to use while you are doing the observation. And it's only still this final classroom observation form that comes from the handbook that you guys created. This is the shortened version of it. This is the only thing that I think
That's what we
goes
fill out.
to the chairs and goes to the person.
I got it.
So, and that's why, yeah, I was really, whatever we said we were gonna do on this form that has been approved, we cannot deviate
Okay.
from. So we can't say, do we like the instructor? It's not on the form, so we're not even gonna go to anything that's not already been approved. And I totally agree with you on this one, because it is, like, you might not see everything that's on here, so do you have to then mark a person down just because you didn't see it because of the nature of their lesson? Or, I think, that idea of using a more qualitative version, as long as we can come up with these 7 items today. The only other one and this one I think came late, so I'm not even sure that, I think I only sent you 3. The checklist. The checklist, at first I thought, no, this reminds me of Jiffy Lube. It's too superficial, it doesn't really give any information, but this was another version of what Iowa State uses, where we could come up with checklist item and you could say, well, if they have the majority of these items, then they've met expectations. So we could also use just a checklist form and maybe make it 2 columns so that we could have that note-taking space on the side. And then you could take notes on 1 column and then go back through the checklist and say, oh yeah, so summarizes periodically and at the end of class, did they do that? Oh, they did do that, check. So or is
I like
this?
this too, because then that'll go into what Mark was saying, like we could take the item and say, to meet this item, you would need to do X, Y, and Z, and then we have a bullet point going, okay, because when we get to that question, go, well, what does that mean? And then we have the bulleted items on what that means, and you can go, okay, yeah, they did those things. I kind of like it.
Okay.
I mean, if all it's going really forward to the chair is that one sheet, and what we're really talking about is trying to make it easier for us to be consistent across the board. What we're looking for basically is a cheat sheet for us.
Yeah, we all agree.
Exactly.
And it really is true.
And that's really what we're trying to agree upon, correct? I mean, because it's not going to go any further than that. It's going to be a cheat sheet for us to use to fill out the actual form that has to go forward.
I don't understand that.
Yes.
I've tried. I have to put it into simple words for my brain.
Alright, so what we need to do, so I think we're looking at a combination of the checklist and the really qualitative form that Melanie, you said you guys had already considered the Northeastern University one. What we need to do is for each of the 7 items on the form that we actually have to fill out and submit, we need to come up with a way to make that observable in sort of a simplified form. And that, I think you have all used this form before and you've observed different people across campuses and disciplines. So we just need to come up with, I think, what are those checkpoints gonna be for example, the first one, the objectives for the class session were achieved. So thinking about, and I would say at this point, think about the best classes you've observed so far. How did you know the objectives for the class session were achieved? And then we'll do that for each of the 7. I put 7 pieces of paper up along the room, around the room, so that we could start brainstorming. And I want you guys to think back, and last time we talked about, the best teachers that we had seen. Now let's think about what we see at CSM though. What do we, I shouldn't say that. The best teachers we've seen at CSM. Because we want to have that framework. I hope this is not meant to be punitive. This is meant for all of us to be better teachers. So the better feedback that we can provide, and if there's something where you can be in a class and say, oh my gosh, I never thought about doing that, we should all be sort of thinking, oh, I can use that, or I might try that, or I would never do that, that wouldn't work. But that's fine. I mean, that's what I think this is about. So what I'm gonna do is I'll write one of the 7 elements from our classroom observation form. If you guys want to just think for a minute about what you have seen and what you have, let's not talk about our own teaching right now, let's talk about what we've seen and what we expect to see when we go into a classroom in terms of meeting these elements or these objectives. So I probably should have copied this form. I didn't think about bringing that copy of the classroom observation form, but I'll write those on the top. I will say too, these are Sharpies and that's a whiteboard, so just hopefully it will not go through, or I may lose my paychecks over the summer while they although this is not a real whiteboard, is it?
So that what it is? It's like a.
That paint.
$7,000.
She said yours was so immaculate.
Oops.
I paid her.
I saw the grant on the show.
When you observe, and you and I have done
That was one code.
how do you
Yeah,
determine whether
I was
the
gonna say, you said what code?
class.
I mean,
So be careful of your truck.
they usually tell you ahead of time what they're gonna do in that class. And then
I accidentally
Like
wrote on
the
the
teacher.
screen like that.
And
My
then
old
she
job.
does that.
I hear your old child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause I, it, like,
Because
usually I pull the screen up and just have a thing on there and then I write on the board on top of the picture.
Oh, yeah.
And I forgot to screen it down and I-
How is your,
Oh, my God. Oh, wow. I had a part-time Mac when I was doing this where he banged on the thing. I guess he got emotional and he hit, the whole thing collapsed. There was a hole now in the wall, so it took.
did you class it?
That partition room never bring it up there.
Yeah.
And once I came down, it came swooping down trying to.
I heard about that, yeah.
So, but they said you were gonna do 6.3. You did 6.
Just your.
You come in and do that class.
Right, yeah.
If you're gonna get into 6.3 and break down like a high school class with all of these eight objectives for 6.3, then you take up, you know, that much your time. To me,
So
when
that you
they
have
say,
it now.
this is the way I look at it, when they say you met the objectives of the class,
Well, see, that's one of the
did
ones I,
you do what the soul
I'm
said?
struggling.
Which one?
the one of corporation, whatever that's C and then corporation.
That sounds right to me.
So that's kind of what you did that day when you got that immaculate outstanding rating.
Yeah, I didn't do anything special.
So what I thought we could do is, and I would encourage you, and I would require you to work with a partner. I think it always is valuable to talk to someone else about what you think or what you've seen. But I'd like us to pick one of the 7 items. What does this look like? So in your experience with what you've seen with, the observation that you've already done and your experience in using this form, what does this look like to you? How do you know the method of presentation was appropriate? And we're just going to come up with a bulleted list, hopefully of several, multiple items, and then as a group figure out which are the 4 or 5 that are most important for when you go into a classroom, regardless of the discipline, regardless of the instructor, what should this look like? So I brought extra Sharpies here. If you want to go, like I said, with a partner would be great, but pick one of them and just start brainstorming. What does this look like when you go into a classroom? So grab yourself a marker, hopefully a partner, and let's get some insight into what you guys have already accomplished or what you guys already know about these topics. And I would say,
right now? or-
yep, go ahead right now,
Go
especially.
to the board and just write them on there.
Yeah, so whatever, when you have done observations before, how do you know objectives were achieved? What evidence do you look for? How do you know?
Just use a pen or a marker.
You can grab one of those Sharpies right there. Okay, one. And just like I said, try to be careful not to write on the actual whiteboard with it.
There you go. Wait a second.
Yeah, so you don't move around to each of the 7 eventually, but up to pick one to start with.
And my syllabus just said, oh, this is math, that's it, doesn't even say what.
Kelly's gonna join us.
Oh, right. You're a guy, you're.
I can't write.
I can't read it. What do you want to do?
Which one?
Communication.
What evidence do you see in the structure?
Okay,
Okay, so, I guess this is like trying to get away from just straight lecturing at them and having them.
How about interactive? That's who's coming to you. That's one of my students. She's coming to you. Incredibly smart. 95 voice. Add her to my
When you're
voice.
communicating, are you getting the information?
That's why I'm over
So
there.
it's
What are
so
we
it's
looking
clear
for?
communication.
Okay.
Just your PowerPoint presentation.
First of all, you know, you should have-
Wait, so they need to
Organized,
It's evolving, talking.
There's something.
Were they posted or were they?
So the books go, well, okay, pull this out my back pocket, throw it out the window.
some along that line of unpresentable.
Is that what you wanted discussion occurred? So yeah, he said, they talking about it as being comment.
Did they speak clearly? Did they speak clearly? That students could understand at a level students could understand.
Oh, yeah.
Visual aids, done professionally, see them.
Back there.
And I think communication also involves all the students. I mean, it's not just, like you said, not just lecture. If you're actually getting information across effectively.
How about a non-verbal response? Would that be a way of learning to communicate effectively?
Okay.
It's just fall asleep. You're
Yeah.
obviously not communicating effectively. That's a good one.
Yeah, you can do that. The problem is you're gonna be kind of skill set.
Oh,
How do you define effective? You know, sleeping, but you know, there's students that.
I'm still struggling. I'm still struggling. I had a student on her phone.
See, that gets.
But two learners and stuff. Yeah. Well, she was calling out all the different outlines on the phone.
Okay, so if you said
Were they
to,
okay,
be able
first
to
off, how are you?
communicate in a layman's
Were they
terms,
able
so
to
it's
understand
understandable.
us? Do you mean to
They're
say-
treated by grade levels.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did they, like I started, did they solve it? They should. That's what I presented. What about, did they summarize?
And you could put visual, audio,
They never should have been kept after the first.
hands-on.
In confidence about that first week. That was true.
Try to find a term. Yeah.
I would say if you've written one or two for one area, go ahead and move on to another one, so that other, you don't have to, read it to death.
What you structure, right? To identify.
Why are you not out writing?
Is that Josh in there?
There's-
Have you looked at
I didn't-
So they talk about it before you write it, and we're sitting here talking about
So-
it.
When you are going into a classroom, what do you expect to see? So a method of presentation where appropriate,
Okay, so not necessarily what we have seen, just what do we expect?
you
to
know,
see?
what would you
are we
expect to
going
see that makes
measure this?
a method of
Okay.
presentation appropriate?
Yeah.
I know what I want to think about it, I don't think it's right.
Okay, we never have to let's see it, what do you want to say?
Okay, whatever you want.
Did it
Person's
engage
prepared
us?
to listen.
Did it get to- maybe that wasn't the appropriate method.
Right? If they walk in there like,
I mean,
they
this
just
is
get
what
like
it's-
stalled,
Sure, but-
and there's no start.
So are they on time?
Yeah, there's no starting point, you know what I mean?
That's
Tell.
they are no starting point. There's no beginning to it.
Okay.
Every
Like a good
lesson,
story.
right, just go.
Yeah, or
Every
something
lesson,
good going.
every lesson plan has a beginning,
What's our-
warm up,
Yeah, something,
preparation.
something to get them working, and if you don't have it, you know they're not ready for class.
So there's no beginning, there's no
Okay.
start.
You know what that means? though.
Initiating events.
Lack of materials, you know, they're, oh, I forgot my phone. Oh, I forgot my notes.
I
Oh,
did.
I meant to bring that to you.
I have done that.
All the way down.
I forgot your exam.
I don't have my notes today. Oh, well, I'm hoping it's.
Don't do that for us.
Yes, I have forgotten material.
What I would say, we want to phrase these things.
To the method of engagement.
So maybe as your,
Okay,
this is a good.
Has lots of materials.
Well, I would think you should, I mean, to me, you're not prepared if you don't have that.
Right.
That's okay.
Well, I would say I'm not inspired, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Leave some stuff for us to write.
okay, we're done.
Say, it shows, the lecture shows organization, instead of just kind of like, because some people, it's really
all
go
over
off
the
on
place,
top.
yeah.
But there shows some kind of structured organization.
Although there are some what we call controlled chaos, where it doesn't seem, but the less, I mean, as long as the end product is there, you've got the objective met, do they really need structure?
Well, I guess what like maybe structure's not the right word, but just saying, it stays on topic within the guidelines.
Is there a combination of-
There were teaching
Well, but I'm just saying, because I was gonna say, it was like,
I don't know.
I know it's just.
I like talking about it a little bit.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
true. I saw it was the person that is, don't take us down another road.
Yeah.
But it's a really good topic to discuss and according to our student that time. And then when we get done with that, I said, let's go back to where we were.
Focus remains on the objective.
So that's control chaos.
Yeah.
Even in
Yeah,
control
focus,
chaos, you gotta
focus.
focus on the objective.
I don't know.
Why is one?
The broke left-handed. Josh is not.
Yeah,
Okay.
they noticed that.
Okay.
Instructor clarifies.
All right, let's go to the next one. Instructor clarifies objectives.
Clear and appropriate objectives for classroom students.
I think that's making sure the students don't.
I appreciate the lines, thank you.
I usually would volunteer to write.
Having the objective line.
I was too short.
Okay,
Instructor don't know where it's at.
See, I'm we're the weird ones. Like, we never use it.
I don't either, it's my own observation.
Yes, I remember you put that on.
Also,
Like, but our objectives are in like, we have like modules, and our objectives for each module are listed. I got it.
objectives documented in.
You two guys need to pace yourselves. Wear yourself out. You guys are going too fast. Slow down a little bit.
Documented in class or. You had. Yeah,
Well, I'm just,
sure, I guess documentation. in
as
the
long
syllabus
as
too,
there's,
right?
they're documenting somewhere so the students know.
Right, but remember the observer has got to see that. Yeah, if they see the syllabus, sure, but in a class, do they see that the objective is there?
No.
Then you can't observe it. That's why writing it on the board.
Yeah.
Have it on for your observation.
You know it's good.
Yes, because as an how would See, he does everything, he's trained, he's got teachers from K through 12, they have usually.
I did
written on
teach.
it. Right, and so they always have that on the board.
I don't know if it's
Or they have
really-
this one.
I'm nursing, we don't do this.
I just figured out where I left off before I go, like.
Well, when someone's observing,
I mean, we're already.
that allows the person to do it if you got a handout. True, that is observable. Okay.
How's that?
Are they?
And yeah, and if you've got it documented, I guess it's.
You're not prepared, you can't find the discussion.
LEGIS.
So are they guiding the discussion? Or is
That's
that,
actually
that's what I'm thinking that what I'm.
Yeah, I think I have whatever.
Right.
So maybe they'll educate.
Now, if you're doing verbally on other things like that, you can mention it.
Right, so I think somebody. Right, so that's the thing, you know, I don't know what else you're gonna
Get remind the students.
Tell them what you're gonna say it, and then tell them what they learned or.
Bingo.
Yeah, isn't that
And the observer.
The link
materials. Use it.
Exactly.
Technology.
How about that? How's that? How's that? They can do it anytime they want.
Yeah, that just
That works? All right, where are we going now?
Keep going on.
All right.
What happens if you see student engagement and content and
What are they on? They knew what to expect.
Doesn't matter, it's the ratio, and I'm trying to explain that.
Yeah.
Hopefully the students are clear, but that's not.
The
water is just cheap.
Well, if they're sitting in class, it's clear.
Okay, good, now they got examples.
Yes.
That's good.
That was really good. Can I add on to that? I think
I would also say like that the teacher
Josh,
made
is it really your
environment so that.
What?
is it really your standard?
Because I know there's some teachers that like will allow students to interrupt them, you know, like.
That's
I think that that's not a good practice.
it depends on what the practice is. Depends on if it's.
Yeah, but from a purely behaviorist standpoint, you know, that's how they're comfortable, they don't want that kind of participation. Maybe the participation is good now, I agree with that philosophy, but there's others that are very, very structured, they don't want their
There
students.
should at least be a time where questions are offered, like, you know, even if it is passing your buddy's point or whatever, so it should be an opportunity for students.
Wouldn't it also depend on the level of student you're teaching? I've never taught an 800 level student, and probably how you have to teach them would be very different than how you would teach, say, you know, somebody the last semester of engineering.
I mean, I taught 900, and in many cases, you have to allow them more questions.
Right.
They get lost, then they get lost forever.
The reason why I'm saying that was one of the classes I watched was a beginning level criminal instructor, and she was fantastic. And she had to keep all of her instructions, instructions clear and concise and short, because she said, take out this paper and put your name on it. And they got a past point, and they turned it into a spin. All they had to do was write 5 words on that piece of paper. That's all they had to do. But they watched a video. Did the police use safe front of force? Yes or no? And she did a clip of all the videos, and then she told her class, oh, we're not objective. No, and then she came back to us, we watched the videos, let's come in and change. Now all they do is write 5 words, yes or no?
And they were engaged.
And they were engaged, and they were watching video, and she had discussions going on about what they thought. But it was, those were very clear, concise, and short, and the students all stayed in with her.
You know, the danger of positive learning approach, I'm all about, you want to, is some, you know, now you get into the style of the professor. You know, some of them, and that is now.
That is nasty.
That varies Socratic, so
Yeah.
I mean, that's not my style, I like the learning environment, but others are very.
Yeah, you're right.
So with this, you're, you know, as long as you write, there's some kind of feedback or some way of knowing.
How about that feedback?
Feedback is,
Yeah, I go sometimes like
Feedback is
bring it
important.
right down. It's a basic process.
and that way it's very, you know, they can choose the method.
Right, it's hard to drill.
Yes, I know, I'm working on that. Okay. Working properly too, like, we're.
Okay,
Cool.
should we go to the next one we done here?
Sport materials. How about,
I just clickers.
What are we doing?
That's the achievement of the objectives for class.
That is, because you have to know what the objective is it a lower level? Like if someone, the objective is list 3 elements, three bone structures or whatever. you do.
I would
As long as you said,
Yeah.
somehow they're like when they listed it, they wrote it down right there.
do you do the thing at the end?
But if you have a higher one that says students
What
evaluate
is it called, when you have the
the
answer right?
effectiveness of the US Constitution,
Because I don't always do that when I'm running.
how did that get achieved?
You know, so you get a
So
smiley face or
objectives-
star.
Oh, so they answer that.
Right, yeah.
Don't you think there is somehow tied to the syllabus?
Yeah.
Syllabus for each class. So
Yeah.
if you go around and write other things, you do go into.
Yeah.
There's a lot of my time is
You
clicking.
have access to the syllabus.
I should participate appropriately.
Should.
You should,
You
yes.
want syllabus aligns with
Well,
the.
there's, in my opinion, that's how I judge whether someone met the objective of the class was, one, did you cover?
Rein it in.
What the
Okay, how do you define cover?
Okay.
Does that just, I talked to them, I lectured them, and that was it? I mean, did they observe it, did they write it? Was there a
In
level
the
of
case, in the
assessment?
case of math, you would almost need somebody that knows material to determine whether that material or that syllabus bullet was adequate.
Right, but how was it achieved? Is achievement just talking about the objective, or is achievement where you can actually see an assessment of it? mean, how do you define what she
At what is.
Yeah, and that's part of it. I mean, you have to know someone who is a student,
Yeah.
because you're not going to assess every class.
Yeah, it's hard to rate in a
They
class
don't
that
assess
becomes.
You don't even
It's
get
like
one day.
sometimes the topic,
some
maybe multiple days, your assessment is like, or.
some people believe that my job is to go in and just cover it, and that achieves the objective. And one might say yes, and one might say no. Did the students understand it? Did they, were they able to demonstrate that had been achieved?
Goes back to what is achievement.
Define achievement.
Can the
What is
instructor also, sometimes.
And I would also
A little bit, like, can the instructor.
nitpick a little bit at the word assessment. Assessment doesn't mean that you have to give them a test.
Yes.
Assessment could be, yeah, I walked around and I saw them all doing their problems and they all did it. They all could perform that skill or whatever it was. So when we say assessment, it doesn't have to be, all right, now everybody put your notes away, I'll give you a multiple choice exam on this. It could be, I mean, you don't do this at college that much, but thumbs up, thumbs down, or it could be a muddiest point paper. All of those are assessments too. I bet you do assess every single class that you teach.
Oh, I know I do.
Yep.
But I mean, it could be clickers too.
Yep.
And the clickers aren't even assigned to them, so you don't know who has.
Yep. But you're figuring out what have they learned or what have they accomplished, because you're making a great point, Christine. Are we just looking at presentation of material here, or are we looking at student learning? I think DAA would argue we have to look at student learning. Not just like, hey, I told them if they didn't get it, but.
That's the old way.
Yeah. Whether we like it or not.
That's the old way.
Yep.
Ask
A form of assessment
unanticipated
was
but appropriate
observed
questions.
Okay.
to validate the achievement.
Okay.
Or inappropriate.
Inappropriate.
Yeah.
More.
As unanticipated.
So if you do a quiz every day, that's a form of assessment.
Yeah, I love the training, so I'll
But
get
it
it.
was observed to validate.
First thing they walk in.
Josh, did you teach it? Where did you
Homework
teach?
is-
Right, in Southern Maryland, instructor, you were
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, they're not-
Well,
Upstate New York, or, yeah, upstate New York.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Because that's where I was.
Back with three
Did you
days.
teach Maryland?
No.
I like it.
It's very different.
Yeah.
It's very different. Like,
I will have-
Okay, now how are we defining?
Get lost earlier, those are forever.
Or-
I guess for was not higher.
What do you?
No,
ADA compliance was observed.
I used to teach
Yeah, I guess
math
that's-
when I had to, you know, but we're no. What's different now?
In my second grade,
We're not, yes, it's not your name. You definitely want to make sure that those. You don't want that stuff.
Really?
Yeah,
Seems
Can't do that.
weird.
There's a little bit of a demonstration
I wanna go-
process.
Okay, so you asked me where they achieve.
Right, so my personal
Get rid of the
experience
achievement. What are the
was,
objectives of a class?
for me, taking a bunch of math tests.
We can't get rid of the
more
achievement.
than-
This is.
No, let's talk about the first word. What is the objective?
Okay, now, you said it's facilities like in our department.
I feel like they did not do a good job of
Objectives,
teaching me
so
how to
clearly
be a
there's an
teacher.
objective
Really?
for
Even
whatever
your
segment we're
classes?
going.
Yeah,
It's
Where'd
their
you get your
facilities.
bachelor's from?
big into
That's
university,
really wrong with
yeah.
that, right? And
I
I
did that same. I was social studies, not math,
Yes.
but that's interesting. But I do think
And it's not language or text.
Yes, Christine and Steve.
It's not
So
this
is there-
class now,
The
it's not really
objectives of the
critical
textbook or
because
academic.
like you said,
I had the text,
You need
the
to-
objective
you
is
need
in
to be a
syllabus. I had not
Yeah.
had
but you need to be a mathematician
validation
who
of
can make that accessible to people who
Yeah.
are not.
Well, ideally,
You don't
a
need
strong
student learning
goal,
outcomes.
although it's hard to. Yeah, I'm really surprised.
They have
Yeah.
outcomes,
Right.
that's a nice,
I had
well,
one
but they don't
friend
really
that's the
measure up.
same program.
But the objective should be.
I know.
Masters in education,
But they're,
who were math, math teachers. And some of them, in New York State, we had to
this
pass
is what happens when
three
you
different
education.
exams.
Validate work.
And so one of them was had
So the objectives are in the
math,
syllabus, but the
intensive,
outcomes are
and then
not in
one of
alignment.
them was, like
So
teaching
The
different
math
methods.
is a little different, our objective.
And I don't remember what the third one was, maybe a combination of the two.
This section
But I was
is
surprised,
this section is
several of my friends barely
about as far as
made the
objective,
minimum
syllabus.
requirements for the math. Like, are you kidding me?
When I was with Towson, we had a lot of people who were actually teaching math in like middle schools, mostly middle schools, because that's always a critical shortage area, who could not pass the praxis too. The
That's
content.
horrible.
Like, I don't care if the kids like you, if
But then your
you can't do
outcomes
the
are
math
Right,
yourself.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
that's scary.
Especially the
That's why
elementary
just so
teachers.
many,
Yeah, that's what I would say. Elementary
So
teachers
many-
always think, I don't understand, it's just
Yeah.
addition and subtraction. If you don't, if you're not gonna go back to the calculator, because you don't understand,
Yeah.
how are you gonna teach math?
Right. It's no wonder we have so many weak math students.
When Josh is.
I used to, before I was a teacher, I substitute taught a lot.
This is what I'm saying, this is what I'm saying.
And sometimes I'd go
Do
to
you have
class,
her reviews of
like
her
this
reviews
one
for
time I
assessing
was,
your difference? Reiterate.
like an 8 or something.
Uh-huh.
And so there was a main teacher, and then she had like,
And I tell you what, it's that you're a professor.
Summarize.
So when she was out,
Instructor summarize the.
her aide
summarize
took
the-
over, and I was just in the classroom for whatever reason. He was teaching math, and he was doing it incorrectly.
The same training.
So I tried to speak up, I didn't wanna like disrespect him or anything, but I'm like, actually. And he's like, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm like, no, you don't. So then I wrote along, so then I didn't wanna feel as, he didn't wanna hear that he was wrong. It was like in the middle of class, so I backed off and didn't say anything, but
And
Wrote
nursing.
along note to the teacher, explained to him.
Well, that's good, you have your own advisory, you know, like intimidation teacher too, yeah, but we had, yes, we had the Josh's
And he was doing kind of an around the world thing,
all
where he would put up like a fan, and they would try to fix it. And you
Across
just,
the board.
it was just so,
And
they
then
didn't understand
we all
positive, negative numbers, like they would say, take this, and whoever said it quicker would go on, but I'm like, they were literally guessing, they had, and he just let them go, because they were having fun, and it was competitive, and I'm like, but they don't know the concept.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and so all the kids were watching, you know, they're not taking in anything valuable, and the people who are reading are not. But at least as a student teacher, hopefully there was still a learning curve, there was some feedback that hopefully he
You
used.
need probably statistics for. History.
So I apologize, I have another meeting at 11,
Okay.
so I'll have to leave a little early.
Math for.
Yeah, do you know what that is?
So math is a
We should
little
get 11.
Yeah.
It's 11.
self-contained.
Oh, it is?
Right.
You're gonna
11
get a
o'clock's
degree
now, right?
in math.
Oh wait,
Yes,
that's
you
just
can
one
get a
45,
degree in
so it's after 11,
It is right now 11.
okay.
And clarify
Direction of the
students.
degree that you are going to
Yeah, you
have.
got
It's a base structure for other.
I agree with you standardizing it.
Yeah.
that would be very hard.
Because
Okay.
like,
And there's also different math classes that are needed in order to like it, just looks like what engineering means, it's gonna be a.
Well, we have a special class.
Yeah, you have a
for
special math.
for nursing.
And ask students.
Which one?
Math 115.
And, oh, that's true.
or like business.
Off the class.
Yes.
Yeah, because we had to change our math, because it wasn't, we weren't high
And when Maryland came down
we
to
weren't high enough.
do your accreditation, they liked that class and said, yes, this is a good class. We structured it plus that class.
Yeah.
Words,
What we need.
business major and particularly nursing. I love it.
So the observations, I've only done maybe a half dozen here at CSM.
Thank you.
Well, because they have
They've all been
They have a
good.
mission.
to get in the nursing book.
I just wondered if
That's
that's
what a lot
the
of.
common experience, but like I haven't
But a lot of.
observed anyone that was like, wow.
Don't come in that day.
That's reassuring, because
Yeah.
I mean, there are some.
They need to
Yeah,
get.
I have done
get
some on
to-
the other hand, I've observed probably a dozen tests.
Once you get the- once you get the results,
Really?
Yeah.
I'm always, that's interesting, that's what I'm doing my dissertation on, is like,
It's the,
professional,
I would
not
expect
very
it to be
Johnson.
Yeah.
It's like 6% of our
Yes.
classes across the state are being taught, it's not like that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Tell that.
Yeah.
That's true.
When I first got here, I was assigned to higher ed.
This is just.
No information at all. How to hire them, what to ask them, they're just like, go ahead and meet with them and see what they think. And then, so it didn't take me long to figure out that, like, wait a minute, there has to be a better way. And so anyways, I started observing the adjuncts that were there, and like one of them was like, oh, I've been here since 2009, and you're the first one that's ever observed it. Like,
I think the standard usually is breaking at the time we need a class.
Yeah.
I think it's the standard.
So we got rid of some adjuncts teachers that just stop. You know, like, well, so, like, when I go in there and see a number of kids, and then when I go to observe them again, half the time they'll not improve at all. So then we get rid of them. But then sometimes
I fundamentally
Not only do they not have any prior experience or
you
training
can
for
give
the
a student,
students,
you can give a
it's a
student
way of
all
bringing them into
what's
sort of
projected,
the mission
all
and
this stuff.
these expectations, so
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Make it a student.
Have fun at your next meeting.
Yeah.
Let's try about 5 more minutes to make sure you write at least one thing in each area, and then we can talk about it in a few minutes, because it is quarter after right now. I wanna make sure we're done by 11:30.
We did this one, and we did.
We did that last.
We did last one, yeah.
Support materials, what evidence did you see that any media manuals, etc., were used appropriately and effectively?
We got at least some.
Classroom said, no.
Oh, yeah.
This is fun.
We have some good discussion.
Man, I'm ineffective. Oh,
She
no.
teaches critical care. I teach.
Technology
Oh,
was
that's
used.
critical care. So much is.
I
see you. I see you.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, okay.
Well,
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
And your foundations course covers like basic practices and skills, everything in that.
I like it.
How do you take vital signs? Why are vital signs important? Why is it important for people to get up out of bed?
I guess how do you define it?
Why is mobility important?
What is defined?
What's the
Balance
material?
material information.
What materials? I mean,
Basics, you know, so they can move on.
what material, I'm talking more about what's in a topic for everybody.
Anything you use to.
Yeah, and then you take it all, and then she kind of hones it down to now you. They don't realize that the universal design, that's what they realize. I'm sure you're reading a lot more. Anatomy and physiology, like the credit for, you know. Yes, I think for everybody, that you were done already, you know, somebody on the task.
I've got my own report where it's not, you know, I'm a great cycle and I get this, like,
You don't have to look, I'm tired, like, I've heard that somewhere.
And it's, I think that's the biggest problem with teaching.
So other students are
They get a lot of foundational and theories and this and that. When you are in a worksheet room or when you have, you know, an access like this, like that, you don't get to flip back through your notes and say, well, wait, well, it should be recorded as not that, which I guess are.
Yeah, right.
More and more. Or you have a station where they get more of this student, you know, so the whole classroom is not set more towards that, that's your default. And then it's less access to do it.
And so you know how to act on their.
Yeah, I mean, there's anything that's like bigger, but that, would you,
Is it going to help? What are you going to do? And that's what I don't do. It's- Don't worry about the lights. I've learned some great English, just.
Okay.
They don't know their.
But then those
Or
schools
they
that are
can-
more.
And then I'll have some that I.
Breaking up the data.
She's just barely there.
If it didn't, then you're not.
Teachers kept asking her more and more questions.
So they went very black and white.
You know, she
They
probably just
over
overthought
here.
these questions.
The variety of support materials used helps to.
I think that's true about education. Nobody is gonna stand there and hold your hand while you complete your entire.
Did that work?
They're idealistic, conscientious. We're not gonna make it, and that's a terrible thing, to pass that judgment on someone.
You know what I do? I do that.
I mean,
Yeah, I got that TV and I'll say, okay, and I do things and what's I want. And they just see all come up, so. It's like that over the art.
It is an art.
That'll be our new game, revive the men.
Okay, come on up there. So good job. So I'm really glad that you guys, you know, I really appreciate the discussion that you had in terms of, you know, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, in terms of the evidence that we see. Obviously, we're not all teaching the same content, we're not all teaching at the same level, but there should be certain basic pedagogical strategies and skills and behaviors that we can agree on as a committee, regardless of the format or regardless of the discipline. Let me see what actual time is. We have about 10 minutes left. What I would want to do is, my goal for today, moving on from today, is to create now a draft of a CSM worksheet based on what we have here. Obviously, we're missing a lot of people, so this will be a draft. We'll bring it back. We'll talk about the different items, and then we'll use it to practice on videos after we've come to a consensus. But for each of the 7 elements that exist on our observation form, which one did you think was probably going to be the most foundational, fundamental skill that a CSM instructor should have? So 4 objectives were achieved. Of the things that are listed, or if you're thinking right now, hey, we should have wrote that, what's the most fundamental skill or the most fundamental evidence that the objectives in a particular class were achieved?
I can't read from this far away.
And you can feel free. So we have, were they presented to the class in the beginning? Did they summarize at the end? Students are assessed in a number of ways. Syllabus aligns with lecture taught. Form of is it form of or formative?
Form of assessment.
Form of assessment was observed to validate achievement. So what's the most important thing in terms of objectives were achieved? What evidence would you look for?
Syllabus aligned with lecture taught.
I agree, syllabus aligns.
Correct. So that meaning that what was stated in the syllabus is what was covered in class, okay? Methods of presentation were appropriate. Was there active learning? Did the method engage students? Was there a combination of methods? No one lost an eye. If you didn't know what Josh was writing as he went around. Students can relate, understand the material. FERPA, ADA, and HIPAA were maintained. So what evidence is the fundamental thing that you think is important to see for the method of presentation?
Top two. Was there active learning and did the method engage the students?
Does everybody use active learning?
Yeah, I would say the second one because I think active learning has kind of become cliche so that you don't really know what that means anymore.
It's a great observation. That's definitely something we would have to unpack further.
Yeah, what the term active.
Because again, we all know, certainly not every content area, not every class is going to be, hey, let's do this really wildly creative, authentic, case study learning group work thing. Sometimes you just gotta cover stuff, and that's true.
But you'd always engage the students regardless of how you're.
But are we worried about engagement here? Method of presentation was appropriate. Is engagement what you want to focus on for this one? Or, because we do have a engagement item later in the list of components for the form.
I guess it then comes down to is if the students could relate or understand the materials, what's really letting you know if your method of presentation worked.
How do you define appropriate?
That's what I was wondering.
Is appropriate that you did everything legally, or is it appropriate that you met the objective?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So when I read this, I thought method of presentation was appropriate, and I read, because there's nothing else that talks about this in any of the other ones, really. I thought this had to do with content. With, students have been able to access whatever information or skill or knowledge that they were supposed to. So it wasn't too, challenging for them. It wasn't too easy. It wasn't unorganized. The method of presentation, I thought. But I see what you guys are also saying about engaging, because that's when you talk about appropriate, which is a value term, then engagement, I think, is something that we always want. That at least students are paying attention and they're interested and they're following along. So I think these are the two that most people are focusing on for this area. Instructor was well prepared. So what's the most important fundamental thing that you would look for in terms of preparation? Adequate materials for the class time, structured or controlled organization, focus remains on objectives, the instructor is on time, teacher is an expert in field and has a plan for each class of how to effectively teach the students.
I think Josh's is prettiest, but I don't know that, I still wouldn't know how to make that
I don't know how to
objective.
evaluate it.
Yeah, which one, the last one?
Last one.
I know, I like it, but I'm like, how do you?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, you can break it. It's like, is someone prepared for their interview? Is someone prepared to do the job that they're doing? Did they bring the right materials? Did they come in and make good use of the time? I mean, these are little things that you can look at that calls in for preparation.
And that all ties into the one that Josh wrote there in the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe take out the expert in their field because we're not really evaluating who got hired.
Yeah.
Just start with the second part and has a plan for.
Yeah. Okay, so Pete has a plan, and do you want to include what Christine was saying about the materials and the timeliness? Or do you want to just leave it as?
I think that falls in underneath when you say effectively.
Yeah, and obviously if you have a plan for class, you gotta bring the handouts or the PowerPoint or the video or whatever it is, so that's part of the plan, okay.
I also like adding the time in it, was the time distribution effectively used? Because sometimes you spend a lot on one point and then you get 2 cents on the other and then it ends up being 50% of the test,
Yeah.
So do they distribute their time appropriately on the topic?
We started to write something there, but then we kind of thought it kind of segued into instructor communicated effectively. We weren't really sure. And that is, you know you're prepared, like we all know what we're going to talk about that particular day. And you kind of know what your students are going to ask. So you're already prepared a little bit on, if student asks me this, I know I'm going to answer it this way. And we weren't really sure if that's a communication or a preparation, where you kind of preparing for the questions that you may or may not get. Okay. That's what I'm not really sure.
I think it goes into communication.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna measure. I don't even know how you measure it either. I can't read it.
Well, I do think this kind of adds on to or enhances what Josh said about being an expert. I think having that expertise, not that you're one chapter ahead of them in the book, but that you can anticipate what are the misconceptions that nursing students make about this concept, or where are the mistakes that people always make when they're trying to use this formula. But you're not only able to anticipate that, but when it comes up, you're not thinking, I don't know. You should say, no, this is, well, let's talk about that further, or this is why, we need to, you might want to reconsider your focus or your understandings on this.
That
So,
might be a little biased towards seasoned teachers, though. Not, and maybe that's what we want. This is the standard, and you're trying to rise to the standard. But I mean, I know now after 12 years with these same subjects that this is what they're going to ask. And when you're a first year, it's hard to anticipate what because you thought you covered it thoroughly, and so it's hard to anticipate what somebody's going to ask.
so what's the difference though between, and I don't disagree at all, that certainly that comes with experience and having taught a course multiple times. But what would we expect even of a first year teacher, a first semester teacher who encounters some kind of obstacle to student understanding? What would we expect of them?
I mean, they should be able to field questions.
Yeah.
It's true.
So you're right that they might not be able to anticipate as well as someone who's taught the class 5 times or 10 times. But at the very least, they should be able to, think about and respond accurately to, or maybe not in the moment, because certainly we cannot all anticipate and answer every question that a student might ask us. But there needs to be some sort of mechanism or some sort of skill set in place that they can then not just say, well, we're not worried about that, let's go on. Because if students have questions, they have questions.
So the other piece of this whole project is to look across the continuum. So you're looking at brand new faculty, and that might be an area where they're going to have growth and development. Whereas you're looking at seasoned vet, maybe you would expect them to have that, and they would have a weakness on, I don't know, active learning or something like that. So it's to look at across the continuum.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we're expecting everybody to be at that level.
Right.
Yeah, our observation may not see that with the first year professor, but in their evaluation of whatever they're doing, you would think the chair would take that into consideration, going, yeah, you didn't have that, but this is your first year. That makes sense.
Right.
Versus someone
We're all
who's been,
terrible at first year.
yeah.
I just finished my second year.
You think you're great until you're second year, and then you're like, wow, that was terrible.
And you can be in your 10th year and say, oh my gosh, what have I been doing?
And I think that goes back to the qualitative point too, is that the whole purpose of what you guys are doing is not to penalize people. It's to help them see, to reflect upon, and to see ways that their teaching can be improved, because that's true of everybody in every learning institution. So yeah, it's not necessarily going to be something that you're going to put a big X through and you don't do that. And the other thing is too, you might be there on a day where not everything is done.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're not doing it. It might just not have been that class period. So
Yeah.
that's, like you said, that's another continuum, that not every lesson is going to look exactly the same. Okay, effective communication. What did you guys think were the most fundamental skills or evidence of effective communication? Interacted with students so that discussion occurred, talking and listening, voice, visual aids, communicate info at a variety of levels, used appropriate, clear, focused language that students can understand, large legible handwriting and notes, positive body language and eye contact, open-ended questions to validate learning.
Like 3 and 6.
Okay. Well, actually, does anybody disagree or want to add more?
I kind of like 2 and 3, because one of the biggest things is you have to be able to communicate at all levels and be able to do it using different methodologies such as visual, audio, kinesthetic. And 3, that your language is clear and focused. I like 2 and 3 a lot because I think 6 is a subset of 2.
We didn't have anything else to write. 1 through 4, you guys covered it. I like 2 and 3 for the same reasons. I think that really, the communication on those variety of levels is so important.
I mean, when we wrote it from 2 different perspectives, and I don't think I captured it well. We wrote it for a variety of levels of being like a high and a low. Like you get that student who just sent me a text that was 20 pages long of an in-depth question to the person who says, just tell me what I need to know. You know, they've got this scatter of that, and then also using the different techniques, visual, audio, and kinesthetic.
So
It's kind of like both.
maybe we could keep it as 3, but just put all students here to focus on that diversity, the fact that students not only are coming with different learning expectations, but also ability levels and prior knowledge. So use appropriate, clear, focused language that all students can understand and follow.
Yes, but I think 2 still needs to be there because it links into the methodologies as to how you're communicating. That's just basically saying you're going to talk to them nicely.
Right, because if we don't add that, all we have is language, and there's more to communication than language. There's so many other different modes. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right,
okay.
and actual intelligences,
Okay.
you know, with the audio and the kinesthetic. So there are multiple intelligences.
Okay.
Yeah.
Instructor defined objectives, and actually before I forget, and you guys were talking about this as well as you were going around, I kind of think that this one should be the first one on the list, and that one should be the last one on your list.
Yes.
So, Melanie, this might be a question for you. Those items 1 through 7, if we don't change the items, can we just reorder those 1 through 7 items?
Let me ask Rob,
Okay.
really, because he holds the handbook. You know.
Okay. Or at the very least, we could make the worksheet up so that it becomes, I just feel like this is kind of the beginning one, and that's the end one. So it's hard when that one's the first one. So maybe just on the worksheet, we can do it in the order where you might actually observe it. Okay. So clarification of objectives. What's the most important skill or the most foundational evidence that you would expect to see? Objectives verbalized.
But we were having that discussion of, do you actually have to have them written on a board or written down or in a piece of paper in front of the student, or can you just verbally say it? You know,
What is
So-
this word right here?
document.
Oh, okay.
I was sorry, nursing abbreviation.
Okay.
So it was objectives are verbalized or documented in class or in whatever learning, whatever EMS platform we're using. It was because some people don't actually write down an objective for the beginning or for a specific class. We're looking at how we get, as I was saying, how we get there at the end of maybe several classes.
And that's that's a continuing question. What is our expectation? I think that having, your objective written on the board, Christine, I think you were saying, like pre-K-12 teachers are expected to have their Common Core, foundation there, how they draw on the state curriculum. It needs to be clear every single day. And I would also argue that we learn better when we know what we're supposed to learn. If I come into class and say, okay, today we're going to cover Chapter 6 School Law, there's like 80,000 school law cases in that chapter. I don't expect them to know 80,000 cases, but if I say you need to know the first case listed on each of these 5 amendments, that's an objective that we can cover in a day, and we might not cover the whole thing, but it also helps students know what they're expected to learn. So maybe based on that, objectives are identified to keep class focused. Maybe you say it. Maybe you write it. Maybe you say, look at page 4 of the
We have
syllabus.
a brand new chair, and our first meeting is new.
Oh yeah, you can't miss that for your first.
Oh yeah, and Rob was nice enough to push his meeting for us, so.
Rob made the chair. We had a new,
Oh, Stephanie, your chair?
I guess we're getting ready to fly back. I didn't mean to cut out, but we kind of need to get to that.
No, it's all.
Yeah, no. I don't want to know that.
I remember opening an email, being a social person, for about a week. Every time I opened my email, I was like, oh my God, because some changes. So do we, I mean, but what do you guys think about that? I personally think in any teaching and learning environment, the more clear you are about what they need to know and be able to do, the more likely they are to achieve it. It's not always a neat little measurable package. So what's our standard as a college in terms of what we would like our instructors to do? Do we not, I mean, I can see where we probably are not gonna expect everybody to do like write it on the board at the beginning of class. That might be a bridge too far for a lot of our faculty.
I think there have to be objectives, but it's just that the students have to be able to find them. I mean, they have to be able to, I don't know.
I have a hard time with like objectives, like, so okay, I'm just thinking of just my lecture just yesterday. Like, it was a building thing, so it wasn't like, you know, I had to say what an atom was, and then how those atoms bind become molecules, and then later in the lecture was, all right, how the molecules are shaped to form bonds, and based on those bonds, it'll tell you if it's polar or non-polar, based on the, tells you if it's a carbohydrate or lipid, and so like, what's my objective? It's like all a continuum, it's not a,
You
like,
had like 4 or 5 objectives there. And that's one
so
of the
there's
things.
no wrap up, like the ones that were saying, you said it at the beginning, you said it at the end, it was going that way, it wasn't going this way.
And I think that's perfectly appropriate. But
Okay.
I think for teachers, it's important to lay out what you are going to accomplish so that you can do that assessment piece at the end. Even if it's not give a test, even if it's not, you're not done with it. It's not that you'll never talk about atoms again. But maybe, so your objectives, just based on what you just said, students will be able to define what an atom is. Students will be able to identify the 2 types of bonds, or
Right, yeah.
So those could be very small chunked objectives, and again, that leads you into, I think, the preparation and the method of presentation, because one of the most important things is next time you teach, probably you're going to go in and say, who can tell me what an atom is? And it's just like a reminder of what we did. Okay, now that we all know what atoms are, we're going to go on to this next thing. But you're doing those little pieces as you go along. So, one of the things that I think that a lot of instructors fall into is they say, but I told them, look at the syllabus this week, we're covering chapter 5. But that doesn't help. That doesn't help them really understand how does chapter 5 mesh with or align with chapter 4, and how does it lead to what we're going to be doing in the rest of the semester. That's what I think objectives do. And I do think, I know a lot of people, because I've heard people in my own division, they're very resistant on not doing stupid students will be able to, and that's fine. But the point of the objective is not to make you follow a formulated pattern. The purpose of an objective is to keep everybody on track. So if you want them to be able to do those 4 things by the time they leave your class, why not tell them what those 4 things are?
Okay.
And not that you don't, but you know
Right.
what I mean? They shouldn't be guessing like, she told us so much stuff today and I don't know what was important, what was not. But if you had, and this could be in your syllabus, it could be in a handout, it could be in my learning, it could be something that you stated. By the end of class today, you need to be able to identify and explain 3 causes of World War II.
But see, my thing is you're putting a time on it when there's no time in what we've been asked to do. It says instructor defined objectives. But there's not a time limit. For like, in my example, we teach 5 modules. We have like 13 modules. And say like the first module is fluid and electrolytes. It takes us 4 days to get through that. But the objectives are written in my learning for that module, exactly what's going to need to be covered in those 4 days. I've defined, I've identified, I've clearly stated what the objectives are that we're going to get to during those 4 days. As far as I'm concerned, I've been putting up my objectives.
Yep, sounds like it.
Now, but if I am going in, having somebody, say, coming in to observe me, he does not have access to my learning from my course. He has no clue. And my individual module objectives are not in my syllabus.
You could provide them, I think, though, right? If somebody's coming in for your observation, you would say, this is what the students have
That's what I
received.
do.
Well, I could-
observed a lot as I'm new.
Right.
And
I mean,
always
I
do.
could. I mean,
Yeah.
but I'm just stating that, should a person who's being observed have to go through all those hoops to make us happy?
Yeah.
Well, that's funny.
Because they're gonna have this ahead of time. time.
we have to see, not only are you handing, maybe you give me a handout so I see it, but I still, as an observer, have to see that you have identified that to the students. If I don't have it in my learning, because I don't have access, I can't observe that.
Right, you see, that's what I'm saying, and this, I might get dinged because I don't have it, but I really do have it because it's in my learning. I mean, I'm just, if the only paper that is going forward is that one question and answer, question sheet, then why are we making it harder for the poor instructor? They're already nervous enough about us coming in. One of my people that I observed, she was so nervous just because I was in her classroom.
But I have a question on that. Don't you guys too? Like, I know when I was observed, we had the person who observed me was Janice. And she emailed, she said, what are you teaching? Send me your syllabus. What are you doing? I said, hey, this is what we're doing.
Yes,
So you
I did.
Okay, so that's
But
what
they verbally told it to me. It wasn't identified in the class. They verbally called me. They gave me the syllabus, but then they verbally called me and said, this is what we're going to be doing that day. Is that a day you'd like to come?
Well, you're gonna have the post-observation follow-up too, so you can say, well, I'm dinging you for this and that, and then at that point you can say, well, see, it's right here, you know? So, I mean, you meet before, you meet after.
Yeah, that could clear up
And that could-
anything.
Yeah.
Because you say, the students did get to see this, because I have it on there.
So that's why I'm having difficulty in thinking which one is the right one, because I don't want to ding a colleague of mine when actually they really do have objectives.
But also, where do we want, and I think one of these, this is an issue where we could talk about this for the entire summer. Where do we want to set that standard?
Okay.
And I think you're raising a good point that there's going to be different ways of doing it. But I think it's certainly appropriate for you to say, hey, you guys, we're doing module 12 today. We're looking at objective 2. Last time we did objective 1 and we've talked about fluids. This time we're covering objective 2. And so you don't have to have like a fancy piece of paper or an agenda or a handout. You don't have to have any of that as long as you make some effort to identify what you're going to cover and focus the class on that. Because if you say, hey, we're going to be talking about fluids in class today, and then you spend the rest of the time talking about something completely different, even if I don't know anything about nursing or science, I know, hey, I didn't hear the word fluid again for this whole lesson. So, and I think the pre and post conference will allow you to say, to situate your lesson for someone who is walking in blind. In many cases, not only has never seen you teach before, but doesn't know anything about your subject area, which is.
So then I think number 2 is actually the
the
one that's the best.
Identify.
Keep class focused.
Right.
Yes, I mean, that's what I think is the standard, because we're trying to keep the class going on target to get through the objective. And however we find those objectives or being shown those objectives is fine.
Right, because like you said, if your students are used to going into my learning before
Yes.
class and printing something out or doing something, then that's not something your observer would necessarily be expected to do. And in a sort of semi-artificial, situation of being observed, you would provide that.
Okay, right. So I think number 2 then is going to be our standard.
Yeah.
That's my vote.
And that it's still, all of these still need to be unpacked. Like, what do we actually mean by these words? What do we actually want to see? Because you get to keep class focused. There's lots of ways that you can continue to develop that. Appropriate participation. Students knew what to expect, what was expected of them, and were well prepared. Students were engaged and at the appropriate time participated in different activities. Feedback is observed. Instructor can rein in a class that becomes off topic. Instructor can readjust focus if students ask questions. This is, I think, the one that's got the largest spectrum of what is appropriate participation.
I really like the feedback. I don't know if we could add to that.
Well,
Students.
but this one, the focus in this one should be on the students.
Right. So that's why I like the feedback with students. Like you're seeing that there's feedback with the students, so that's good. They are participating. They are giving feedback to the instructor, right? Isn't that what that's?
Well, no, that's true. Okay, that's not.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Feedback to the students is observed, because I have a different interpretation of that.
What's your interpretation?
I'm thinking that you're giving students.
Oh, I was thinking that the students were getting feedback.
No, the idea
They're
behind it was
asking you
that students
questions
were
and that they're
giving the
engaged and
feedback,
they're
yeah.
asking, right?
From
Right.
students.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Student feedback is observed.
Yes.
Maybe that's what we should put in.
Okay, so the students are the
All right, okay.
Because in a lecture, it might be, I don't know what that means. In a lab, it might be, we can't make this thing work.
Sure.
But they're doing something to indicate that they're following
Yes.
along and processing. It might just be answering a question, it might be doing clickers. So whatever it is that you're expecting of them, they're doing it.
Yes.
Okay.
I would like 2 and 3 to be combined, kind of.
But, yeah,
Like students who are engaged, because that if
And
they're
at appropriate
engaged and they're
time, they
doing these
provide
things,
feedback.
right.
Students were engaged and provided and gave feedback. Or something, no, just take out all the methodologies, there's too many to count.
okay.
Something along those lines is what I'm trying to
So
say.
students, the students were engaged?
At the appropriate time too. It wasn't like it was just chaos in there, right? It was appropriate student participation. Students participate appropriately.
No,
Right.
that's
So-
the second part of the sentence, at the appropriate time, then they did one of those steps.
Yes. No, what I'm saying is I think that needs to stay in there at the appropriate time.
Whatever is the engagement time.
So at the appropriate time, they participated in the expected activity. So whether it be taking notes, if you're supposed to be taking notes, they should be taking notes. If you're supposed to be watching video, they should be watching the video.
Follow the expectations. Students were engaged and followed the expectations. Right, is that what we're trying to say?
That's
what we're trying to say.
There's so many things
Yeah.
going on here. So students were engaged, participated in, what did you just say now?
I said it followed like teachers' expectations.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that, because sometimes you have students, you're like, okay, come on, let's get up, we're gonna do this, and they're all like, oh, and then you're like, come on, get up.
Right.
So it's like, no, they're doing it appropriately, as expected from whatever you're asking them.
I thought we were meant to keep the focus on students. Because now we're saying follow teachers' expectations.
Well, but I think that's our definition of
You just said-
participated appropriately. So they were engaged and followed, you could even leave out teacher, followed or met. Man, I don't like that word either. Because let's stop for a minute, what are some of the things we don't wanna see?
Texting.
So not sitting there on their
Sleeping.
phone, not sleeping.
We wanna make sure that.
Sidebars.
What are we asking here, that the instructor has control of the class?
No,
Is that what we're asking?
no, we're
Is
asking,
Not in control as far as, this is what you must learn, but just not that it's chaos.
we're asking that the students are participating. The student, it's not that they're doing what they're told, it's more that they're actually being engaged in what's going on in the classroom.
You
They're
know, the
not,
student isn't when they're sleeping. I mean, that's just.
Sure.
right, or they're doing their
Right.
math homework or studying
Right.
for a biology test, that's half hour after the class.
So when we're asking students to participate appropriately, what I would like to think of it is, are students engaged?
Okay.
Right? That would help me.
So just leave it that students are engaged.
If you put them in a small group and you expect them to discuss this, and they're discussing their party last night.
Or they're braiding
you know,
each
or
other's
they're-
hair.
You know, I don't know how to word that.
Yeah, I
Students
know.
were engaged
And,
topic specific or topic related.
and I think maybe we also wanna say, I'm putting my own.
Yeah.
Do you want to link it to the objective? You know, students were engaged with completing
The topic.
the topic or the objective, because like you said, if they're engaged, if they're talking about the capital.
Yeah, exactly.
They're engaged, but that's not how they help with the objective. Right,
Yeah.
so.
Mine practice braiding their hair.
Well, I kind of like, I mean, 4 and 5 seems a little negatively worded, maybe the word it not so negative, but sometimes you can be meaningfully engaged and be like, oh yeah, I had a patient with that, and then it ends up being like a 10-minute discussion of this patient's condition that really, eats up
It's not
time. So that's meaningfully engaged, but it's not like appropriately
That's
paced or.
the objective.
So kind of like maybe that the teacher is able to.
The student again, so
Yeah.
students are meaningfully engaged in the topic of discussion for the day.
Okay.
or topic of the day.
Or the lesson.
However you want to put it,
Yeah,
yeah.
because the topic of the day might be the cat.
Back to the lesson.
Yeah, actually, if we just left it, I don't even think we need or activities. They're engaged in the topic, whatever that topic looks
Yes,
like.
sure.
Whether it be
Yes.
a lab or a lecture or a simulation or a debate, they're meaningfully engaged in topic to achieve objectives or
To accomplish.
to accomplish objectives.
Because this is the only one that's really
To work
focused
towards
on.
objectives.
I would
Maybe not
tie it
achieve
back
them
to
all.
our thing though, the objectives were achieved, so this, are the students participating and meaningfully engaged in achieving the objective?
Okay.
There you
Because, yes,
Link
because
it all back in there.
this is
Tied up in a pretty bow.
There you go.
this is the only one that's focused on the students.
Yes.
Everything else, yeah, I know.
Poor Greg, he's reining us back in. It's the student. It's the students.
It's called refocusing. I do it a lot. It's because everything else is tied to the instructor. Whereas this is the only one where you're actually looking at the students. What are the students doing?
And that raises a great point too, because I didn't see it this way, but some comments have come up. Are we talking about classroom management here?
We don't have any up there at all about classroom management.
But I think some of the comments are that the teacher needs to be able to manage the classroom. So, yeah, that removes the focus, but is that what you guys think is sort of the foundational skill is then
Maybe
you
that
can-
goes back with instructors prepared.
Yeah,
Instructors,
the pacing and the flexibility stuff.
yeah, instructors
Yeah.
prepared to manage off top, I think. Maybe
But that's
instructor
being
preparation.
specific things
Yeah.
again, and it's getting negative. And I think that will get parceled in once we get these global ideas, then we can put in examples or
That's true too.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we're just trying to come up with that,
Yeah.
thank you for bringing us back to that. So we're gonna
So
come up with
good.
one
Bringing
general
us in.
statement, and then we can put those details in the checklist.
yeah.
So,
I actually was observing a class where two students got in an argument.
Oh, my goodness.
It was like, over the discussion.
yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh boy.
What did the instructor do?
He said he needed to meet with both of them after class.
Did they stop? Did he say that? Did they stop?
He kind of reined them in, but I mean, it was like, I wasn't expecting
Oh, I bet not.
Wow.
So,
that. And I guess the instructor was going, oh God, not today.
Right.
Yeah.
but they were apparently engaged. So, enough
They were
to-
There's a perfect example of students were engaged, but
We didn't like it. Okay, well, I'll try to rephrase it too, but we're gonna leave it maybe something like meaningful engagement in topic or activities to achieve the stated objectives. And then we'll worry about the classroom management piece, and maybe we might put pacing in here, because obviously for K-12 teachers, there's that whole, it's kind of a cliche now, but that idea of wittedness. That you're not just continuing right along with your PowerPoint while people are sleeping and fighting and texting. So I kind of think that's what that is. Like, what does, I don't know. I know some people are here like, hey, if they want to sleep, I don't care. I'll just
Right,
get into the
just stop
store.
Yeah, but they're not participating. If they're sleeping, there's no process at all. That's where I kind of look, if they're texting or they're drawing. Look, when I was in classes, I grew a lot, especially in boring lectures, but I was always listening.
Yeah.
And I've seen students where you'll sit there and you'll test them, say, do you remember what I was saying this? And they'll look up for what they're doing and they'll come right in and tell you exactly what's going on. Some people need to do that. So, but sleeping, you're not.
Well, just an aside, I had a student, you're getting her. I had a student and she could only literally sit for 45 minutes. It was an hour and 25-minute class, or a 45-minute class. And literally every day at 45 minutes, I would look at her and her head would go down and she was out.
Oh, wow.
And I timed the class according to when she would do that. That's when we would take our break. And she sat right in the very front seat. She said, I really honestly don't mean to fall asleep. I'm really not bored. I'm really, really listening. But she, for whatever reason, once she sat for 45 minutes, that was her done. Unless I got her up and moving, she was done.
Wow.
And so I just took my cue from her. And because she came up and she apologized profusely, but we had pictures of her sound asleep. Sitting down, her eyes are closed. The students were actively taking pictures of her. And they said they're gonna use them everywhere they
Who
go.
wrote that HIPAA and the
I was I'm sorry.
But I mean, she's just like this, and but it was really kind of a way for me to learn how to pace. And once I started pacing like that, she was actively engaged all the time.
And being responsive to student needs.
But I mean, so students don't just fall asleep because of bored.
Oh, no. They fall asleep for lots of
Most of mine are coming in after their 12-hour shifts.
This is not.
But we're basing it on sleep, but
They're actually asleep, I mean, they're just not, there's no process.
It does.
No, I
My class starts right after lunch. So
They're dragging.
1 o'clock.
Right, I got those 7 to 7 nurses who come in after 7 a.m. and they come in.
So I do think that that's appropriate, because when you're faced with a student who has a particular issue, or you know it's right after lunch, or they just came from lecture and now they're in your, clinical or your lab, and you know that they've been 3 hours of class already, but what are you gonna do? You
But
know,
it's
I
hard.
think that's the biggest question that I hope that can come out of this faculty evaluation, and I know some people aren't comfortable with it, but how can we do better for our students? It shouldn't just be about all what we think is right or what we think is good, but the whole focus needs to be on what's gonna help our students be successful, and not taking it to the extreme, like we need to hold their hand and walk them through to make sure they all pass. Nobody wants that. But if we set if you had set your standard, sorry, it's an hour and 45-minute class, too bad, so sad if you fall asleep, you have to leave. Well, that student would not have achieved. So you made one small, relatively minor accommodation to work for everybody.
It did.
So.
We all got into stretch breaks every 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Universal design.
It was really, I mean, it was really fun. It was a great way to kind of cater, I knew, I would look at the clock and know I've got like 2 minutes to wrap this out. So can you take a break? And it was I would look at it, okay, I got 2 minutes, I'll do this, and I would, or I would do something really theatrical, like right in front of her, like I would be like, because I was on a boot all semester, so I would go and stomp really loud, and I'd just keep her going for an extra couple minutes until we.
Sorry. Wow.
All right, so our last one, this one I guess is somewhat optional because not everybody uses the same support materials, but what do we think about the effective use of support materials?
I like our last sentence that we came up with.
I just, what is,
To achieve your objective.
You have to go read it.
why is it?
Because she said I was writing too small. So no writing extra.
45 minutes.
So let's be obnoxious.
Well, and actually, I think support materials, again, we're drawing it back to the objective, the focus of the class. Don't show a video just to show a video because kids like videos. Does it help you meet the objective?
Yes.
Does it help the students learn? I think that actually is a pretty good one. I don't think we all need to set up our classroom and share and groups of 5. I mean,
Yeah, I use groups of 4, so I
I was just
understand.
I don't think technology maybe always has to be used. Props and equipment, but again, support materials, bring in a prop if it's important to meet the objective, but otherwise, just dressing up doesn't necessarily help you. And clickers, do you guys all use clickers?
We did.
Yeah, I never used clickers in a college class. although I
We use
used
pull
to-
everywhere, which is the same thing though.
Oh, yeah. So do we think that our fancy one down here with the is, okay. And I do appreciate that because I think, again, how we can define objectives is going to vary, but the whole point is the focus. Yeah,
Right.
so, it may be a really small piece of a much bigger outcome or unit, but everything should go back to, and I think one of the things too is making it clear, however you want to do it, what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to know. And that will help us all. I think that will also help you guys when you evaluate too, because you don't need to know the particular content that's being taught if you can see the alignment. That's all you need to worry about is, does the alignment make sense? And we're only looking at that 75%, level. It's not like everybody has to be like this is outstanding, amazing teacher every single time they teach, because none of us are. They just need to be using these basic sort of foundational behaviors. So. So what I will do is I'll take this and I'll put it maybe into a more of a checklist form, and then we'll see, you know, if you guys agree that it meets what we talked about today and what the other faculty members, what the other committee members who are not here think about it, if we want to revise or update it, and then we'll start using it to assess the teaching. Hopefully I'm having some trouble finding a lot of college level teaching, but if we even look at, I think, high school, at least you can see teachers doing things. And it's not necessarily that, my main goal is that we all kind of agree that when we say the objectives are identified, do we all agree that in a lesson that we watched that there was an objective? So it doesn't matter what content that we're doing it. It'd be best if it was college, but you know, we'll at least be able to have practice seeing what actual teachers are doing. Did you guys have any questions, or is there anything that has not been done that you think would be useful, or?
So what did we decide? So this is a must, right? This is
Yes.
what's been approved by the college.
That's what's
And
going to go
we're
forward.
going to ask Rob Farinelli if maybe we flip the two, just to make
I
that.
don't think that's just
Right.
I actually,
Yes.
yeah, based on what you guys said, let's not even go there.
Right,
Yeah.
so this is still what we are using.
Yes.
This is going to be for us to keep our brains straight.
So what
And
I'm gonna do is come up with something like this.
Right.
Based on all these criteria that you guys put up, especially the first foundational one that we just discussed, is gonna be the first item. And then based on what's written there, I might come up with a couple more and then bring it back to you guys for some feedback about what kinds of things you thought were appropriate and what, because I think one of the issues we had was preparation and communication and participation. They're kind of nebulous, so we might want to say, well, this is definitely communication, and then we can narrow it down. It can be as specific as you guys think is helpful, or, but I think the benefit of a checklist, and we could even do it sort of like, you know, excellent, met expectation, did not, or.
Just have this actual comments.
Yeah, and definitely a comment section
have
and a notes section, so that you
just do like
can, as you're
a-
going along, you're not saying, well, what does bullet point number 5 say? You're just note taking, and then you can go back and.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about the checklist too is that this is not something that has to be approved by the faculty senate, so if we need to make modifications.
Yes.
Yeah, we could continue,
This is just our-
use it
this
for
is just our-
semester.
Yeah, right.
So on this, like to keep my brain straight, this is where more important than that, because that's where to keep our brain straight, that maybe we would have that one first on the checklist.
Right, so the one that we came up with is
The one last one you're gonna
most
write later on the
important.
paper,
You're gonna
so.
write it at the end after you're going to start. This is for like taking in with you, make your life easier.
Yeah.
And having a place for comments, and then we can just ask in the comment section, you can just figure out what's stripes and what's not stripes.
Right.
So we can then write out appropriately.
Yep, and then we don't have to worry about too much of, you know, getting into point values on
Yes.
things. It's just like, hey, we said the objective needed to be identified, and that's where, again, you can remove yourself from it and be more objective, because you don't have to say, well, that's not how I would have done it. Was it done? Yes or no?